Hey everybody, welcome to Crackpot, the podcast where each and every week we dive into a different conspiracy theory and we also discuss the merits and or the demerits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach.
Hey, Zach.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
My good man.
Here we are, once again.
Yeah.
Each and every week.
Each and every week. Looking at different conspiracy theories.
Discussing
the merits and or the demerits of each week.
Are you a medical doctor?
Technically, okay, in the U.S.
Right. You know what? Yeah, I am not either.
No, I am not anywhere.
And also, this podcast, in case you needed a reminder, is not medical advice. So,
yeah, it's shocking. I know.
And if you needed me to say that to remind you, then maybe this isn't the show for you. But look, what's surprising to me, and maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe I'm selling us short. We do have a number of doctors who listen to this show. Like
we do.
Actual medical doctors.
Yes.
Which
so thanks.
Tell me more. But what we're talking about today, I don't even know what to call it. We'll land on something and you'll see it in your podcast feed.
You never have to think about it, yeah.
But it's like, it's placebos, it's the brain, it's the weird stuff that our brain can do that doesn't make sense, at least as far as science as we understand it today is.
It's interesting. So I've heard about this concept where, for whatever reason, the body, the mind, it heals itself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just does.
Oh, it does all sorts of weird stuff.
Well, to the degree that they actually have to plant usually a fake, like a sugar pill, or have a control group where somebody's just taking something that's completely innocuous, because otherwise your brain's going to trick you into healing itself. It's like, what does that even mean?
What does that even mean? And also, how does it do that?
Yeah.
And it does. I mean, that's like indisputable. So what does that mean? What does that mean
exactly
the human body can do and can't do? And we'll get into all that. This is not just about placebos. It's about all sorts of weird brain stuff. But let's just start with the fact, Zach, that the brain is weird. The brain is so insanely complex.
Yeah.
I fathom to wonder if humans will ever fully understand what the brain is capable of and also how it works. Which is a bold statement because science, is on an exponential curve of knowledge and everything else, but it is just so bizarre. I mean, to give you an understanding, like we don't even understand how the brain of a worm works, okay? And
no offense to our worm listeners out there.
Seriously, please. Thank you for listening and subscribing and liking us on Facebook. But the brain, the worm brain has 302 neurons and about 7,000 connections. And we cannot figure that out. By comparison,
here we go.
The human brain, Zach, has 100 billion neurons and an estimated 100 trillion synapses or connections.
That's wild.
It is.
Yeah.
It is unfathomable. I mean, 100 billion neurons alone, I mean, that is oddly about the same number of stars in the Milky Way. It is such an unfathomably large number. It's hard to just grasp it in our brains, which also goes without saying, like, we're trying to figure out our brains using our brains. It's like, is our brain even going to allow us to understand it?
Right.
I mean, that's a side tangent.
That's a really deep thought.
It is. It also sounds
like a philosophical experiment, isn't it? Like, yeah.
I don't know. And I mean, just a couple other weird brain facts I found that I thought were interesting. Estimated that every human has about 60,000 thoughts a day.
That's it? That actually doesn't sound like that much to me.
60,000 is a pretty big number, though.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I guess, get a drink of water now.
And also, information travels at about 250 miles per hour inside of our brain. So there is a speed to thought. Like there was a speed to light, and the speed to thought is about 250 miles an hour.
Yeah, so it's not going very far, so that's pretty fast.
It's true. Anyway, but so much of what happens inside our bodies, it's directly affected by what is in our thoughts and what is in our brains.
Okay.
Which, to me, naively, before I started looking into this, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like what you think shouldn't really affect like your heart rate, or whether or not, your foot hurts, or whether or not you do well on your, science exam or something like that. Right. It just seems like two very separate things.
But I mean, that's why people say, hey, think positive thoughts. Envision success.
Oh, it's like you're reading my notes, man. Think positive thoughts. Did you know that pessimists get more colds than optimists? Like that is a very real thing. Like the more optimistic you are, probably the more healthy you are.
Interesting.
Which I don't know. It's just going to be my mantra for this whole episode. Like that doesn't make sense. But you look at people that have cancer or AIDS, if they have a quote unquote fighting spirit, like they want to beat the disease actively within their brain, they oftentimes live much longer than people who just succumb and accept their fate.
Wow.
And obviously that's not 100% true all the time, but statistically speaking, it's a very real thing. Like the more of a fighting spirit you have, the longer you live. Oddly, also, married women have a stronger immune system than unmarried women, which seems totally random and weird. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, I mean, maybe it's because they're definitely cohabiting with other people and more, exposed to different germs and bacteria and stuff like that. But also, happily married women have a stronger immune system than unhappily married women.
Sure.
So again, it's that power of positive thinking type thing.
Which is you in a nutshell, basically.
I am not a pessimist. I wouldn't also classify myself as an optimist. Right. I'm an optimistic realist. I would like to believe that the best is going to happen, but I also... what are you? Are you...
I think I'm pretty optimistic. Don't you think so?
I think so.
Yeah, generally.
Maybe.
You know what? Yeah, I am. I'm an optimist.
Today forward, you bet I am.
Based on what I've been told now, I feel like I should be.
You should. Everyone should be. I don't know if that's something you can change or not. Let's find out, I guess. But there's also this thing that the body cannot always distinguish between what is real and what is not real. And this is a theme we're going to come back to later. And if you kind of break that down, it does make sense, because you can get stressed out or freaked out or work yourself up over just simple thoughts. Like maybe it's a scary memory and you just kind of like sit there and you just like, all of a sudden your heart is racing. You get this feeling of anxiety in your gut or something like that. There's nothing in your periphery. There's nothing in your line of sight. There's no immediate threat, but like you can physically work yourself up. Which, if you extrapolate that into a lot of these scenarios and a lot of these situations I'll be talking about, you can kind of see how this might start working. The idea is that imagination and reality are indistinguishable inside the brain. The brain views an imagined thought and a real thought or a real scenario as the same exact thing.
Got it. It's just a thought either way to it.
Exactly.
Huh. Okay.
Exactly. And you kind of, to take this into the physical realm, you look at, say, phantom limbs. And I'm not exactly talking about the great song by the Shins, Zach. I'm talking about like an amputee, like someone who maybe lost an arm or a leg or a wrist or a hand or something like that. These people talk about feeling their hand or feeling their foot or feeling their leg below the knee when it is no longer there. And to someone who's never experienced that, the idea is like, what? Why? How? I don't get it. But the brain is just wired in a way where these synapses still exist. And even though it's not physically there, the brain imagines it to be there. So you still feel the phantom limb, I guess.
Can I come down with a interesting anecdote?
Oh, please.
So I had heard a story, I feel like on This American Life, probably 10 or like 15 years ago, where they were talking about this situation where people would have like crippling muscle spasms on a phantom limb.
Oh, God.
And
that
just
sounds
like
awful.
And there's nothing they could do because
like
they
what?
can't untense their arm or their leg or whatever the case may be. And a doctor had figured out a pretty ingenious solution, which was basically placing a mirror up to their leg, right?
I heard about this.
Yeah, seeing that leg there and then doing something to kind of move it around cured this problem.
Exactly.
For most people.
Doing massage on the leg, but then the patient sees the reflection of it, and then their brain's like, oh, my leg is now being massaged, and then it works. It works itself out.
It's tricking the brain, which is insane.
Which is 90% of our success with this podcast, believe it or not.
Ew.
Yeah, anyway. So you mentioned the power of visualization. Let's talk about it, because it's really interesting. So there was this scientific study that was done in Israel a while back where scientists took groups of soldiers and they had them march 40 kilometers, which is roughly about 25 miles.
Sure.
Every group went the same distance, period. Okay? So one group, he told them, or I would say probably they told them, the scientists told them, you're going to march 30 kilometers. And then when they got 30 kilometers, they said, well, actually you got to go 10 more now. And then they had to go 10 more. Okay? Then they took another group and they said, okay, you guys, you're going to go 60 kilometers. Go. And then they stopped them at 40 and they said, okay, no, actually you're done. You see where this is going? They had another group where they actually showed like distance markers like 1K, 2K, 3, all the way up to 40 so they could see along the way how close they were getting. And another one where there were no visual markers at all. And then they took blood samples from them at the end and they tested the level of just stress hormones and everything else in the blood. And it was indicative. You could tell like who was more stressed out and who wasn't. And if you look at it from the perspective of like everyone went 40 kilometers, period.
Sure.
No one should be more or less stressed out, but it was all about their perception. It was all about what they thought they were doing and how far they thought they were and how far they thought they had to go after the fact.
Right.
Visualization. So then you take this really fascinating sports visualization exercise they did. There was these Soviet athletes, and they broke them into like 5 or 6 groups here. One group of athletes, and I couldn't for the life of me find what kind of athletes. So picture in your mind, I don't know, swimmers or shot put or discus or track and field, doesn't matter. One group of athletes did 100% training. Every day they went out and they trained their bodies over and over and over and over until they performed. The other group, or another group, they did 75% training and 25% visualization. They sat down and they said, just think over and over, shooting the perfect shot put, jumping over the hurdle perfectly, and do that for 25% of your time here. Another group, 50-50. Another group, 75% visualization, 25 training. And the final group was only visualization. Like they didn't go out and physically do the event. They only sat down and pictured themselves doing the event. Zach, do you want to guess who performed the best?
Well, here's what I want to say. So that was my strategy for the bar exam.
Yeah, how'd it go?
Not that well. So I'm tempted to say isn't going to be the group of folks that just visualized it, but
it was the group of folks that did 100%. The more visualizing that they did, the better they did. Now, you also have to factor in that these were all like highly trained, very skilled athletes to begin with.
Sure.
You know, it's not like you can sit there and picture yourself doing the 100-meter fly and like go and, you know, win a gold at the Olympics. Like they were already all very good. So, you know, obviously take that with a, you know, whatever you want, but the group that did the most visualization did the best. And they think it is because the brain cannot distinguish between performing the event and picturing yourself performing the event. So if you just picture yourself performing perfectly, that is the way your muscle memory will work. And when I say muscle memory, there is no muscle memory, but you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Right. It's the thought.
Which just seems so counterintuitive.
I would assume that there had to be some sort of like physiological pairing with this. So it's like you have the actual, you're visualizing what the success looks like, but then also to go alongside that, your legs
I would have thought so too.
Yeah,
I would have thought so too. But, without like reading the Russian, scientific study, I would assume they're still like doing weight training and they're still eating properly and everything else like that. And this isn't probably like 2 years out. This is probably like a month out or something like
totally
that.
Get it.
So
Yeah.
Nevertheless, like it seems so counterintuitive to what should actually happen. But again, it's that power of the brain that just, to me, a non-medical doctor in the U.S., it doesn't make any sense. But let's take this a step forward. Let's take this into like the medical world. So cancer patients who visualize their chemotherapy and their radiation treatment physically attacking the cancer inside their body do remarkably better with their treatment than people who don't.
I've heard this. This is crazy.
So the study I read, they actually had these patients like draw themselves and then like draw in the cancer. Like, take a black crayon or something and like draw the cancer. And then they sat down and they taught them these visualization techniques. It's like, picture the radiation, picture the chemotherapy, like physically attacking. What does that look like? What does it look like after it attacks it? What does it look like when it gets better? And like they did better, which I don't know. Like, how do you explain that? I don't expect you to have an answer.
No, I
but
don't.
It's that power of the brain. So even to take that a step further, there was this doctor who pioneered this same idea of like visualizing attacking cancer. And he trained his colleagues to teach this technique to 159 patients with medically uncurable cancer. These were all people who had less than 12 months to live, according to medical science. And he taught this to them. And they did it. And after 4 years later, 63 of them were still alive, which was statistically way more than would have been otherwise. 63 were still alive, and 14 of those 63 no longer had any trace of cancer. Now treatment and stage 4, stage 4 is not a death sentence, and cancer does weird things.
Wow.
But those numbers are statistically higher than even those outliers that normally happen.
That is bonkers.
It is bonkers. It's like the future of medicine. I would assume maybe to harness this idea to like teach people how to visualize their diseases like vanishing. Now, the controversy around this particular study was that these were perhaps not the average patients. So they had that fighting spirit within them already. So they were like, they want, like, not to imply that some people don't want to beat cancer, but they were like gung ho. They were, more outgoing than others. And they might have just had this extraordinary fighting spirit, which might have tainted the results. Nevertheless, like the numbers don't lie.
Exactly. It's still incredible.
But to even take that another step forward, white blood cells.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about the really great White Stripes album. White blood cells. They're the body's immune system, right? Now, white blood cells, it actually refers to a whole bunch of different types of cells. And yep, me too. I learned this too, which is probably why we're not medical doctors.
Technically not a medical doctor in the U.S.
But I'm not going to read through all the different kinds of cells that categorizes. But nevertheless, this doctor decided to try an experiment. So he took 2 groups of people and he said, hey, white blood cells, picture them in your brain. Actually, there's more than one type of, it's a large category. So he said, And also before I go into this, the caveat is like, these are two very healthy groups of people. There's no cancer. There's no underlying disease. As far as I know, they don't even have the common cold. So they're healthy people. And he said, okay, one of the types of cells within white blood cells are called neutrophil cells. This is what a neutrophil cell looks like. This is what it does. Now, I want you, Group A, to picture your body producing only more neutrophil cells.
Okay.
And do this. And This is how you do it. And do this for like 2 weeks every day or something, for 20 minutes in the morning and night. I don't know. But they learned this. And then they took the other healthy group of people and he said, white blood cells, this is what they are. There's this type of white blood cell called a T cell. I want you guys to visualize creating more T cells in your body. Only more T cells. This one tiny specific type of white blood cell that, for all I know, they probably didn't even know existed before this.
For sure.
Guess what, Zach? You know exactly where this is going.
I do.
But they come back and they do blood samples, and each group, each person had more of the specific type of cell that they were visualizing creating, and not the other kind that the other group was trying to create. What else can the brain do?
I got nothing. I mean, honestly,
I know.
Yeah.
I don't mean to like be cliche or like just sit here and like gawk, but it's like, what?
On the other hand, though, I will say, because your brain is in control of everything else in your body, it does logically make sense also.
It does. It does. But the fact that we can actually harness that and actively do that and like consciously control that,
sure,
at least in some studies, is astounding.
Yeah, no, that's true. So,
okay. Placebos. Let's talk about placebos.
Sure.
It's kind of led with that, and placebos are weird. I think, though they kind of, fall into everything else I've been talking about, but they're bizarre. So a placebo is, the definition is any medical treatment given to a patient that has no specific action on the body, either given to humor the patient or part of a double-blind study. So it's a very benign thing that you either try to trick someone with or you use it as a study to see if the medication is actually working. Which, again, the fact that you have to use them,
you have to account for that.
You have to account for that. It says something like this is not just like crazy random stuff. This isn't like debating whether or not clairvoyants are real. Like this is science. This is medical science and weird stuff. So placebos, actually, some placebos are more effective than other placebos. And even the way you administer a placebo can determine how effective it is. But generally speaking, a placebo is usually either a sugar pill or saline solution, which is just like, a saltwater drip. Yep. So on average in studies, about 35% of the population will respond to a placebo, meaning that their body believes it's real.
Sure.
So there's even another type of placebo. I guess you can call it a placebo surgery. Like there are cases where, say you have a runner's knee, for example, okay? And they're like, well, probably, the patient knows that like a saline, or a morphine drip or something isn't going to cure their runner's knee. And like a prescription bottle of pills isn't going to cure their runner's knee. Surgery has to be the explanation. So like they go into the surgery room, they're wearing the gown, they get an anesthesiologist, and the surgeon just makes an incision and then sews it up.
Right.
They
doesn't do a thing.
They don't repair the meniscus. They don't replace anything. They literally cut, sew, done.
Yeah.
Patient doesn't know.
Right.
And the patient will say their knee is cured.
This is like my kids, okay? So they don't, if they have a cut or a bruise or it doesn't even matter what.
Yeah.
As long as you put a Band-Aid on it, it's better.
It's better.
Instantly. Pain gone.
But there's truth, like there's actual scientific truth to that.
Sure.
It's not just your kid being your kid. It's like, that's the way the human brain works, which is it's bizarre.
That's really funny.
But, I talk about, the method, of course. injections and surgery is more effective than a drip, I guess, which would also be an injection. But anyway, those are more effective, generally speaking, than pills. So there's like a hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And even the way, and I'm sure like there's billions of dollars in pharmaceutical money being poured into this, like the psychology of it, but even the pill size, shape, and color play a role into this.
Interesting.
Yellow and orange pills are generally perceived as being mood manipulators. Yep. Dark red pills are seen as stimulants. Lavender or blue pills are perceived as being like almost hallucinogenic. Wow. And white pills are generally painkillers. So if you look at any sort of over-the-counter drug, chances are it's probably white. And a lot of that plays into the psychology of just popping a pill and feeling better. And also, as a side comment, I was reading that there really haven't been new over-the-counter pain-killing drugs approved, and I don't want to say exactly, but probably like a decade or two or three, because of this placebo effect is what they think. And there's even some people that think that like most, if not all, of the pain-killing attributes of the over-the-counter drugs are just placebo effects.
That's fascinating. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Bet you wish you didn't hear that. Sorry. And of course, I mentioned that the doctor's attitude can even have an effect on it. Like if they're very serious and they're like, okay, this is a big deal. I don't give this drug to everyone. You're a special case and you really need to be religious about when you take it and how you take it. And okay, yeah, I guess you can do it. Chances are it's going to be better. And then they're like, all right, here, just go, my nurse will explain it. I got to run to the next thing.
Sure.
It's fascinating. So I hate that this always keeps coming back to cancer because it's not a fun or interesting thing to talk about. But there was this patient who had inoperable stage 4 cancer, and he begged and begged and begged the doctor for this brand new experimental drug that he read about. He's like, "This is out there. Come on. Please get me into the study, prescribe this to me. It can't do any wrong. It's not going to hurt me. I'm going to die anyway, more or less." And the doctor was very, very hesitant to do this because it was, untested and, so on and so forth. But finally convinced the doctor to prescribe it. The patient took it. And by the way, like it said that like the doctor really didn't think this guy was going to live through the week. So he's like, well, what do I got to lose? This guy's like at death's door. Okay. So gets the pills, gets the medication, and he starts taking it. And this is in quotes. He said his tumors started to melt like snow, just vanished. The doctor didn't think he would live through the week, and this guy's cancer is just vanishing. It's just gone. And he's cured more or less. He's living life again. And then these articles start to come out in medical journals that the drug wasn't as effective as the doctors thought it was. And as soon as he read this, his cancer returned. Okay. So he goes back and he tells the doctor this, and the doctor realizes at this point what's happening. He's like,
goodness.
This is purely placebo. Like, I don't know how you can beat cancer with a placebo, but clearly it's working, and I'm gonna keep playing along.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because
you have to.
It's my patient, of course. You want to, you have to. So the doctor told him that the drug was effective that he took. Like he got this special kind, but it had actually deteriorated in transit. So like that's why his cancer came back, not the article he read. It was this defective thing. He's like, don't worry, I'm going to find the good kind. We're going to get it here ASAP, and we're going to give this to you again. So he did it, and he went through this elaborate procedure, and he gave it to the patient, and his cancer vanished. It was gone. Like almost instantaneously. And then the American Medical Association puts out a press release several months later that the drug is worthless. It's absolutely pointless. It did no good. It didn't pass anything. And we're throwing it out and we're starting from scratch. And the guy literally died 2 days after reading it. Yeah. The power of what the brain and visualization and thinking can actually do.
It's unbelievable.
And I'm not saying that, like, please don't take this as like, anyone can beat cancer if they just believe in it. That's not what I'm saying. Clearly, it's obviously a hell of a lot more complicated than that. But it's so fascinating that at least some people can their brain can figure out how to fight this stuff in a way that's actually effective.
That's unbelievable.
And before you start to think like, I've never had a placebo, or I don't know anyone that's gone through a study like this, or these are all wacky stories and like this, maybe not. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably everyone who's listening to this, you included, Zach, knows a couple who tried really, really, really hard to have a baby.
I know where this is going. Sure.
Right?
Yep.
And they did everything. And it was very sad for them. And then they decided that they were going to adopt a child. And they went through the process, and they brought home a healthy kid, and they loved the kid to death, and everything was going great. And then guess what happened? They got pregnant.
Mm-hmm. This happens all the time.
I mean, I don't want to say all the time, but it's like almost everyone knows that couple. Maybe you are that couple.
Right.
And I can't explain it any better than anyone else can, except that it's like something inside your brain just switched. And it's like, oh, I can be a parent. And I don't mean that as I don't take that the wrong way. You know the gist I'm getting at, but it's like something happened where all of a sudden, despite what the doctor said, despite everything else that you did up to that point, it's like, oh, and now we're pregnant. And that's wonderful.
Exactly. Amazing.
Right. It's just, you see what I mean when I say like the brain, like what the heck?
No, I mean, just the human mind is absolutely unbelievable.
It is. And it doesn't make any sense. And anyone that can explain it to me, I'm all ears. But I mean, clearly not all drugs are placebos, right?
For sure.
Yes. I mean, we know that like vitamin C will get rid of scurvy, whether you believe it or not. Right. Insulin will help your diabetes, whether you are skeptical or not. Like these are real things. So some medicine works, period.
Yeah, exactly right.
So take something like LSD. Okay. If you drop LSD, you're probably going to get high, right?
I'd assume so.
You would assume so.
Jeez.
You would assume so. But there is such a thing as placebo tripping, where you... and this was back when LSD was not a Schedule I drug, and they could do these wild studies back in the 50s and early 60s. But they would be like, okay, guys, we're going to give you LSD, and this is what you're going to see, and this is what you're going to experience, and it's going to last about 12 hours. And these people would have full-blown trips. Real honest to God trips.
Yeah.
Visualization, the whole psychological thing that you go through and all that jazz. But they got nothing more than like a piece of paper with like glue on it or something that. Wow. And you can't say that they didn't experience it, because they did. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't acid. So like, what was it? But there's even to flip that around, there are cases where I guess the only ones I read about were like Buddhist monks who years and years of practicing meditation, deep meditation, but they would want to study the effects of LSD on their brains and study that to be like, okay, well, you're used to these different levels of consciousness and deep brain activity. So what does acid do to you? And there's numerous cases where these people like couldn't get high at all. And they would give them like 10 times a normal dose, like something that would just string someone else out for like, who knows how long. And they'd be like, nah, I got nothing. Nah, I don't know what this is all about. This is kind of boring.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you even need drugs, kids? Like, no, just man, it's all in your brain. You just get high in your bedroom with absolutely nothing.
There you go.
There's your talk for the day. Okay, so let's slightly switch gears here, and let's talk about like unconscious beliefs. Let's talk about hypnotism, because hypnotism is really, what is it like? Just tricking the brain to do stuff and like think back, right?
I've always wondered what exactly is going on.
I don't have an answer for you.
Okay,
so
yeah.
I don't know.
But you're definitely tricking your brain into something.
Yes. Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go
Keep
with
it simple. Yep.
But with hypnotism, through hypnotism, you can control allergic reactions. You can control blood flow patterns. You can control your heart rate. You can control how much pain you can tolerate, and you can control even your body temperature.
You can like quit smoking that way too.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of just random things you can do through hypnotism.
Wild. And like it seems, maybe it's just me talking, I don't know, but to me
It seems a little woo to me, I think.
yeah,
right?
to me it seems just kind of hippy dippy out there, like new agey kind of. It's like it's one step away from crystals, kind of. I mean,
Right.
I laugh, but it's like
I'm with you.
What are we really doing here? But it's like this is real stuff. Like you can't discount when a trained hypnotist and someone who is being hypnotized, when they say, okay, your body temperature is at 98.6, let's go up to 101. And they're able to do it. Like you and I probably couldn't do that right now without some help external, I guess.
For sure.
So that all seems interesting. And I don't mean to discount it, but here's one case of hypnotism that just blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. So this was back in 1951. There is a disease called, and I may be mispronouncing it, Brock's disease, BROCQS disease. Basically what it is, you get scales on your skin, almost like it looks reptilian in nature, and it's incredibly painful because it dries and it cracks and it bleeds, and you end up having a very short lifespan if you have this disease, generally speaking. And just as an aside, like people that had this, quote unquote, back in the day were oftentimes as part of like a freak show.
Sure.
Like oh, come see alligator boy type thing. But there was this hypnotist who found a child with this, and he's like, well, what do I got to lose? The kid's like, what do I got to lose? He's puts him into a deep state, and he convinces him to have these scales fall off his skin, right? So, and like they do this, like, okay, through whatever hypnotism techniques, they go through this, and like sure enough, several days later, the scales fall off the skin, which you might say, okay, Tim, that's kind of what you talked about before, but the difference is this is a genetic disease. This is part of your actual DNA. So if you draw the conclusion, this hypnotist was able to convince this person to alter their physical DNA in a way that they were, quote unquote, cured of this disease. So if you can do that, like what can't you do?
It's totally next level.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like X-Men style stuff. This is like
totally
superhero, like what is the body not capable of if you start learning how to harness these things on a larger scale.
Right.
It's
beyond explanation. I
right.
Honestly, like I have no idea even what to say to that.
It's just absolutely weird. So, okay. You want to hear weird? I'll tell you weird, Zach. There was a guy by the name of Jack Schwartz, who in the 1970s did a series of studies, and these studies were conducted in hospitals, institutions, universities, all under strict guidance with, scientists and medical doctors, etc. You can picture it in your head. What Jack could do is he could take a 6-inch sailmaker's needle. And by the way, I looked that up. It's a nasty looking needle. Okay. I mean, you're going through canvas sails, essentially. He could take a 6-inch sailmaker's needle and put it through his arm without any pain, okay? Without any bleeding. Okay. And he would run it through the other side, and there would be a hole, and then the hole would close up.
Sure. Without
scarring or bleeding or pain.
David Blaine does this for like a magic trick.
Yeah, and I'm going to assume that that's an illusion.
Sure.
Without knowing more. Unless he's able to
Trained his
tap into
mind.
this. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess I haven't seen it and I shouldn't judge. Listener David, if you want to pipe in, you're always welcome on the show. You know that. But this guy could also carry around hot coals in his hand. No burning, no scarring, no singeing, nothing like that. He would put and have other people put out lit cigarettes on his arms without scarring or burning or pain. And these scientists were just baffled, and probably still are. But he said he's like, I'm not special. I'm not unique. Like, I just learned to do this because I was in a Nazi concentration camp and I was tortured day in and day out. And this is how I was able to physically get through and survive that ordeal. I taught myself to shut off pain. I taught myself to heal myself, because if I didn't, I would have been dead. And I know what you're saying, at least about the pain part. I'm sure you probably can't explain the rest of it. I certainly can't, but I just read that far in the study and I'm like, okay, so he just has an incredibly high threshold for pain, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's a logical explanation.
Totally, yeah.
They hooked him up to brain scans. He was not producing any beta brain waves, which is what you produce when you feel pain. Whether you're hiding it or you have a high threshold or anything else, like, he physically was not producing any pain.
He shut off that pain mechanism.
He shut it off.
Huh. Yeah.
Which, like, what else can we do? Like, if we're capable of that as a species, like, what else can we do, man? Another guy similar, his name was Miran Dajo. This is like 1946, 47-ish. Same thing. He would physically run swords through his abdomen. And they would, they x-rayed him. And they're like, yep, the sword is piercing his spleen and his gallbladder and his stomach and his intestines and his liver and everything else. And, like, he should be bleeding internally and he will probably die. And they, he would pull the sword out and, like, you could see the hole. You could, like, see through him.
That's nuts.
And then it closed up. And he went on to live another day.
Gross.
Super gross, but also, like, I'm sorry, what?
No kidding.
The only person that got hurt by this was a witness who had a heart attack, seeing him run himself through with a sword.
Can you imagine, like, figuring out that you can do that? Like, there's a sword.
I wonder if I can do this.
Yeah.
It's like,
It makes no sense.
50-50. You're either going to do it or you're not,
That's
right?
absolutely true. That's bizarre. Just bizarre.
It's absolutely bizarre. But you know what it reminds me of?
No.
Stigmata.
Interesting. I could see how that works, kind of.
At least in my brain, that's
Tie-in, yeah.
Okay, explain stigmata.
It's when a person, experiences a situation in which they have, like, some of the same scars and bleeding as Jesus did when he was dying on the cross. And so I guess to try to make this connection work, what you'd say is, well, maybe they had such an extreme belief in Jesus' death and the suffering that he went through, so the body reproduced those same, cuts and scars and everything else.
Right.
I guess.
Right. And by the way, the next part of this might be very blasphemous to you, depending on your beliefs, but I'm just going to plow ahead. So that's your warning. But the first recorded manifestation of the wounds of the crucifixion, or stigmata, was Saint Francis of Assisi. So this happened roughly about the year 1200, more or less. He was a very obviously devout individual, became a saint, of course, and he one day just started bleeding from his hands and his feet. And it was the same wounds as Jesus experienced during the crucifixion. And what is interesting about his and many other stigmata that happened after him were that the wounds were in his actual hands.
Sure. Which is not where apparently
Which is not where people were actually crucified. So the paintings, the sculptures, the depictions up to that point all have the nails going through Jesus's actual palm, like his hand.
Right.
But without getting too gruesome, if you were to run a nail through your hand, like there's nothing there holding it on, you would literally fall out. It's just tendons and muscle, and the weight of the body, you would fall. So the nails actually went through the wrist.
Right.
But if you read the biblical accounts, it says hands. And if you see the artwork, it says hands. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it is probably not a heavenly miracle necessarily. It's really just the brain saying, like, holy smokes, like we can do this. We can create wounds. Like they bled. He bled like actual real blood. And there were actual real holes in his hand that he did not physically put there.
Right.
Like it just happened. And then it went away. And then, it happened many times throughout his life.
So this is just a psychosomatic situation, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Which also got me thinking about some of the miracles that Jesus performed.
Okay.
According to the Gospels.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, again, if you don't want to hear some blasphemous talk, go to our next episode or something like that. But I don't want to speak for you or anyone else, but probably around the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, I read these accounts of the miracles of Jesus, teaching the lame to walk and the blind to see and raising people from the dead. And I said, that's all fine and good. My understanding of the world as I know it is that probably didn't happen, but nevertheless, like, the stories are important and it's a good allegory, it's a great metaphor, and so on and so forth. And that's just me. Anyway, I don't want to speak for anyone else. But what if he actually did those things? Mm-hmm. And and I know, like, half of you listening are like, yeah, Tim, that's what he actually did, and that's why he was, one of the reasons he was such a cool guy. But for those of you that are more skeptical about this sort of thing, or science-minded or so on, just, like, suspend belief for just a second and, like, you take take John chapter 9 verses 6 through 7. It said, after Jesus said this, he spit on the ground, he made some mud, and he smeared it on the man's eyes. And then he said, go and wash the mud off in this pool. And the man went and he washed it off in the pool. And after he washed off the mud, he could see. That sounds a lot like some of the placebo stuff we were talking about in the first half, right?
It's very interesting. I never thought of it that way.
But if you can convince someone that doing these actions will actually cure their blindness, whether it's genetic or whether it's a physical optic nerve inside of the eye or a cornea or glaucoma or God knows what else this person might have been inflicted with, if they believe that it can actually cure it, maybe it can. Mm-hmm. Or you take Mark chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. He says, so Jesus said to the man, get up, pick up your mat and go on home. And the man got right up and he picked up his mat and he went out while everyone watched in amazement. I mean, that, if you believe the first half of this episode, which is documented science, there's not a lot of reason why you shouldn't also believe that Jesus was actually working miracles. And, like, what is this? Like, because, we can't necessarily figure it out. So as far as I'm concerned, if you want to call this stuff a miracle, then by all means call it a miracle, because until science is able to say, like, this is what happens, it's a miracle to me.
I did not see this coming at all, actually. This tie-in is actually really fascinating. And it is a miracle, I guess, either way. Whether it's
right?
spiritual or something else, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
All right. So with that, thank you guys for tuning in.
It's funny, Tim. I wish I could, I wish I could definitively say, hey, Here's what's going on.
Right.
Here's how it works. I got nothing.
No.
I got absolutely, like, it's just really cool. It's super interesting. And I did not see, like I said,
You didn't see it coming.
the spiritual tie-in. So, I mean, that's completely fascinating to me.
It is.
I love it.
It just absolutely is. It's something else, whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, well, that's one of those
it's
things
real
too.
stuff.
Like for the rest of my life, I could be hearing these anecdotal stories of these miracles and all that, and it will never get old, and it'll always be super interesting to me. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You know, I love it. I just love it. So,
And you medical doctors out there that can give me an explanation, I'd love to hear it. I truly would.
Exactly.
But until then, call it what you want, I guess. So, guys, if you haven't already, honestly, hit subscribe and rate us if you can, if your little podcast player allows it. It really helps us and helps the show, helps other people find us. And tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local miracle workers about our podcast, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.